As all turned away from the ill Laird, a humble servant was the only one who stayed loyal. Waves crashed against jagged rocks below, sending up sprays of foam that glimmered like broken glass under the pale light of a waning moon. Atop the highest cliff stood the castle of Laird Corvath, a fortress of dark stone that had weathered centuries, yet now seemed burdened by the weight of silence and shadow. Its towers rose like somber sentinels into the night, their windows darkened, save for a few flickering candle flames within. The castle was nearly empty. Once, it had been filled with courtiers, knights, and servants, all loyal to their lord. But now, rumors of a strange illness, some whispered of a curse, had driven nearly everyone away. Nobles had fled, claiming duty elsewhere. Servants had abandoned their posts, unwilling to face the whispers and shadows that seemed to seep from the castle walls themselves. And in the midst of it all, the Laird remained, silent and restless, a figure both feared and pitied. Only one stayed. Her name was Ilara, a humble servant whose family had served the castle for generations. She was small and unassuming, with hands calloused from years of work and eyes that held quiet strength. No one could say why she remained when all others fled. Perhaps it was loyalty, or perhaps it was something deeper, something in her heart that recognized the man behind the Laird's grim reputation. The corridors of the castle were cold and drafty, echoing with the faintest footsteps. Ilara moved with practiced quietness, carrying trays of food and water to the rooms that were still in use. Her footsteps led her always to the Laird's chamber, a room that smelled faintly of herbs and candle smoke. The door stood slightly ajar, and inside, Laird Corvath sat in his high-backed chair, his eyes dark and hollow, staring into the fire that cast flickering shadows across the walls. He did not speak as she entered. She placed the tray carefully on a side table and bowed her head slightly. "Your meal," she said softly. The Laird's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, his expression unreadable. "Leave it," he muttered, voice hoarse, almost like a whisper carried on the wind. Ilara hesitated, then stepped closer. "I will wait," she said. Her voice was steady, carrying no judgment, only patience. He looked at her then, truly looked, as if seeing her for the first time. His eyes flickered with something unrecognizable, fear perhaps, or longing. "Why are you still here?" he asked, the words low and sharp, yet tinged with curiosity. Ilara lowered her gaze, refusing to answer with words. Her silence spoke louder than any explanation could. She remained, and that was enough. Days passed in the same quiet rhythm. The storm outside raged, sometimes battering the castle with wind and rain, sometimes yielding to eerie, still nights when the moon shone pale and cold. Inside, the Laird grew weaker, the illness, or curse, taking its toll. His temper flared unpredictably, and even Ilara, gentle and loyal, found herself on edge at times. Yet she never wavered. She tended to his needs, cleaned his room, and listened without complaint, even when he spoke in riddles or retreated into silence for hours. The castle, once lively, felt alive only through her presence. She moved from room to room like a quiet thread of light through the darkness, her loyalty a stark contrast to the shadows that threatened to consume everything. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, the Laird began to notice. One night the storm had been particularly fierce. Lightning split the sky, and thunder shook the very stones beneath their feet. The Laird had retreated to his chamber earlier than usual, gripping the arms of his chair as though it could anchor him to the mortal world. Ilara entered with a small lamp, the flickering light casting long, wavering shadows across the walls. "You should rest," she said, placing the lamp on the table beside him. "I cannot," he replied, voice tight, as if speaking too loudly might summon the shadows he so feared. "The nights are restless," Ilara nodded. She did not push him, for she had learned long ago that patience was sometimes more powerful than force. She sat quietly on a low stool nearby, folding her hands in her lap, her eyes steady on his. Hours passed. The storm outside raged, and inside the silence between them grew heavy yet intimate, filled with the weight of unspoken words. Then suddenly the Laird spoke, his voice breaking through the silence like a fragile sigh. "Do you ever fear the shadows, Alara?" She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Everyone fears the shadows," she said simply, "but the shadows cannot take what you will not surrender." For a moment he seemed to consider her words. A flicker of something human, something he had long buried beneath pride and fear, passed through his eyes, and then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by the mask of the Laird, grim and distant. "You speak as if you know me," he said, almost accusingly. "I know the man beneath the mask," she replied softly, "and I will not turn away, no matter how dark it grows." He did not respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes as if trying to shut out both the storm and the thought of vulnerability. Alara watched him quietly, waiting as she always did. In the quiet moments she could sense the conflict within him, the fear of the curse, the fear of reliance, and perhaps even the fear of hope. Days blended into nights and nights into days. The castle seemed to hold its breath as the storm passed and returned, a rhythm that mirrored the uncertainty in the Laird's heart. Alara continued her duties, her presence a constant reassurance in a place where everything else had fled. One morning, after a particularly harsh night, she found the Laird standing at the edge of the cliffs, staring down at the raging sea below. His cloak whipped around him in the wind, and his face was pale against the gray sky. He did not notice her approach until she was close enough to hear the roar of the waves mingled with his own ragged breath. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice strained. "I go where I am needed," she replied, her tone gentle but firm. He turned to her then, and for the first time she saw the weight he carried, not just in his body but in his soul. The illness, the curse, the fear of being abandoned, it was all written across his features. And yet there was something else too, a glimmer of recognition, of longing for something he had not dared to name. "You could leave," he said quietly, almost a whisper. "Like the others. Why do you stay?" Alara stepped closer, letting the wind tug at her hair and cloak. "Because someone must," she said simply. "Because someone must believe that you are more than the shadows that surround you." The Laird's eyes narrowed, searching hers, as though trying to decipher a truth he had long forgotten. Then, without warning, the wind carried away the last of his words, leaving only the sound of the sea and the beating of their hearts. For a brief moment they stood together, two figures against the vast expanse of storm and cliff, connected by unspoken trust and fragile hope. As night fell again, the castle seemed a little less silent. In his chamber, the Laird moved with more purpose, and Alara's hands were steady, guided by a quiet strength born of loyalty and love. The shadows still lingered, still whispered and threatened, but for the first time in many months they seemed less suffocating, less absolute. That night, as the wind howled and rain tapped against the windows, the Laird turned his gaze to her once more. His voice was low, almost lost to the storm. "I do not know if I can be saved." Alara knelt beside him, her hand resting on his arm, steadying him not just physically, but in ways that no one else had dared. "Then let me try," she whispered. "Let me be the one who does not turn away." For a long moment the room was silent, save for the storm. Then slowly he exhaled, a sound that was part relief, part fear, part wonder. He did not speak again that night, but something had shifted between them. A fragile trust, a connection forged in quiet courage and steadfast loyalty, had taken root. And somewhere deep within, beneath the illness and the curse and the fear, a spark of hope flickered, small, fragile, but stubborn. The castle remained dark and storm-lashed, the winds outside relentless. But inside, in the chamber where the Laird and the humble servant sat, there was warmth. A warmth that came not from fire or candlelight, but from presence, from unwavering loyalty, from the quiet truth that even in the darkest shadow, someone could choose to stay. And as the storm raged on, The Laird, for the first time in many months, allowed himself to imagine a world where he was not entirely alone. The days grew shorter, and the castle seemed to sink further into shadow. A pale fog clung to the cliffs, curling around the towers and walls like ghostly fingers. Even when the sun rose, its light felt weak, as if the castle had drawn the warmth of the world into itself and left only grayness behind. Inside, silence reigned, except for the faint whispers that some claimed drifted through the halls. Some said it was the wind, others claimed the curse itself had a voice. Alara moved through the corridors with her usual quiet steps, carrying trays of food or emptying chamber pots, her hands steady, her heart steadfast. She had learned to ignore the whispers, but they grew stronger each day. Sometimes, late at night, she thought she could hear the Laird's name, spoken softly in tones that made her shiver, yet stirred a strange curiosity. The Laird had grown thinner and paler. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now seemed haunted, like mirrors reflecting a storm no one else could see. He spent long hours sitting in his chamber, staring into the fire, his hands trembling slightly as he clenched and unclenched them. Occasionally, he muttered words that made no sense, names, dates, fragments of memory that seemed torn from another life. Alara never judged. She simply watched, tending to his needs, offering food, water, and the quiet companionship he seemed unable to accept from anyone else. One evening, the castle's great hall was empty except for the fire that burned low in the hearth. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind carried a hollow moan through the stone corridors. Alara approached the Laird's chamber, lantern in hand. She paused, sensing the unusual stillness that had settled over the room. The door was slightly open. She pushed it gently. Inside, the Laird sat hunched on the floor, his cloak wrapped around him like a shroud. His eyes were closed and he trembled, shivering though the fire flickered warmly nearby. "Alara," he whispered, almost like a prayer. His voice was weak, desperate. She stepped closer, kneeling beside him. "I am here," she said softly. "You are not alone." He opened his eyes slowly, revealing the deep shadows under them, the fear, and a glimmer of something raw and human beneath the proud mask he always wore. "The voices, they never stop," he said, his voice breaking. "They tell me I am cursed, that I am doomed. They tell me I am alone." Alara reached out, placing her hand over his. Her touch was steady, grounding. "You are not alone," she repeated. "I will not leave, I will not turn away." For a moment he seemed to search her face as if looking for a lie. Finding none, he closed his eyes again, letting out a long, shuddering breath. She remained beside him, silent, letting the firelight dance across his pale features. Days passed, and the Laird's condition did not improve. If anything, it worsened. The whispers grew louder, the shadows darker. Alara spent more time in the chambers, reading aloud from old books she had found in the castle library, speaking gently to him as if words themselves could push the darkness away. Sometimes he listened, sometimes he did not. One morning, as the fog hung thick over the cliffs, Alara discovered an old scroll hidden in a dusty chest beneath the library floorboards. The writing was faded, but she could make out a prophecy. "A darkness born of blood and pride shall cling to the air of the stone castle. Only one who offers loyalty without fear, without question, without doubt, can break the chains of shadow, but such devotion will demand courage beyond measure." Her heart beat fast. Could this be the curse? Was she the one the prophecy spoke of? She folded the scroll carefully and carried it to the Laird's chamber. He was sitting by the fire, staring at the flames, lost in thought. Alara knelt beside him and placed the scroll on the table. "I found this," she said. It may tell us what is happening to you." The Laird leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he read. "A prophecy," he muttered. "I do not believe in such things. They are for fools and dreamers." Alara met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps," she said softly, "but sometimes prophecies are the only light we have in darkness. And even if it is just a story, it reminds us there may be hope." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time in many months, a flicker of something almost human passed through his eyes. He said nothing more, but the small gesture of allowing her to read the prophecy to him seemed to open a door he had long kept shut. The next days were heavy with unease. The Laird wandered the halls at odd hours, muttering, pacing, sometimes gripping his head as though the whispers had become unbearable. Ilara followed him quietly, offering water, steadying him, speaking words of encouragement. She had never known fear like this, but she did not falter. Her loyalty was her anchor, and she clung to it fiercely. One night, when the moon hung low and silver in the sky, the Laird disappeared from his chamber. Ilara found him standing at the edge of the cliffs, staring down at the sea below. His cloak flapped wildly in the wind, and he seemed lost in some terrible memory or vision. "Ilara," he said without turning, "the curse, it is stronger tonight. I feel it in my bones. It tells me I am not worth saving." She stepped forward, her voice steady despite the wind and storm. "No one says you must be worth saving," she replied. "You are, and I am here, that is enough." He turned to her then, his eyes reflecting the storm and something deeper, something that frightened him. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you remain when all others flee?" Ilara hesitated, then said, "Because someone must see the man behind the Laird, because someone must not turn away. Even in darkness, even when it seems hopeless, loyalty and love can be stronger than fear." For a long moment the wind howled around them. The sea crashed far below, the cliffs trembling under the force of the storm. And yet in that moment something shifted. The Laird, who had known only isolation and fear, felt a flicker of warmth, fragile but undeniable. The nights grew longer and the whispers became nearly unbearable. Yet through it all, Ilara remained. She discovered small ways to soothe him. A warm cloth on his hands, herbs steeped in boiling water, stories read aloud from ancient books. She learned to read the moods of the castle, the ways the shadows shifted, the patterns of the whispers. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the Laird began to trust her presence. One evening, as a thunderstorm raged outside, he allowed her to sit beside him by the fire. He spoke little, but when he did, it was in fragmented sentences, sharing memories of his youth, his regrets, and the fear that had kept him distant from all who had once loved him. Ilara listened, offering no judgment, only presence. "You do not know what it is to be abandoned," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "To feel everything slip away and know you cannot stop it." "I know the feeling of fear," she replied softly. "But I also know the power of standing by someone even when the world turns away. And I am here. I will not leave." A long silence followed, broken only by the crackling fire. Then, almost imperceptibly, the Laird reached for her hand. Their fingers brushed, and he did not pull away. His eyes, dark and haunted, met hers, and for a fleeting moment he allowed himself to feel connection instead of isolation. That night, the storm raged with unusual fury. Lightning split the sky, and thunder shook the cliffs. The whispers of the curse grew louder, almost urgent, as if warning the Laird of the danger outside himself. He rose suddenly, stumbling toward the window, eyes wide and fearful. "Ilara," he gasped. "The shadows, they are coming closer. I can feel them in the walls, in the stones. I cannot." She grabbed his arm, steadying him. "You can," she said firmly, "because you are not alone. I am here, and I will not leave." He looked at her, his eyes filled with terror and awe. "No one survives this darkness except perhaps you," he whispered. Ilara's heart pounded, but she did not let it falter. "Then I will survive," she said, "because I am here for you." The Laird closed his eyes and leaned back against the window sill, trembling, exhausted, yet somehow calmed by her presence. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside, in the small chamber where two figures faced the curse together, there was a fragile light. A fragile hope, and in that light the seeds of trust and devotion began to take root. The fog clung to the castle like a living thing, hiding its towers and walls in a soft, gray shroud. The cliffs below groaned under the weight of the waves, as though the sea itself mourned the castle's solitude. Inside, the air was thick with the lingering scent of herbs and smoke. Ilara moved through the halls with her quiet certainty, her lantern casting small circles of light that danced against the stone. Laird Corveth paced the chamber, his cloak dragging along the floor. The shadows seemed to twist and writhe around him, and the whispers of the curse had grown louder in recent days. He muttered fragments of thought, fragments of memory, and fragments of fear, and sometimes even he could not distinguish which was which. Ilara entered quietly, holding a tray with warm tea and herbs. "It is time to rest," she said softly, though she knew he would resist. "I cannot rest," he replied, his voice low and harsh, though not directed at her. "Not when the walls speak, not when the shadows move, not when the world waits to see me fall." She placed the tray on the table and knelt beside him. "You are not alone," she reminded him. "You are not meant to face this alone. Let me stand with you." For a moment his eyes softened, and he glanced at her hand resting gently on the edge of the tray. You are different from the others," he said, almost in wonder. "You do not fear me, you do not flee." "I stay because I choose to," she replied simply. "Because I believe you are more than the curse and the shadows that haunt you." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Do you know what it is to be feared, to be abandoned, to be hunted by whispers and shadows? Most would flee, most would leave me to my doom." "I know that," she said, "and yet I remain." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it a new sound. A faint trumpet, the distant clatter of hooves, voices rising above the storm. Ilara froze, listening. The castle had long been isolated, abandoned by neighbors and allies alike. Now something stirred beyond the fog. "Riders," she whispered. "Someone comes." The Laird stiffened, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. "They come for the castle," he said, voice tight. "I can feel it. The weak, the greedy, they smell blood in the stone and think to take it." Ilara's heart quickened. The prophecy she had found in the library came to mind, the prophecy that spoke of darkness and loyalty, of courage beyond measure. If the Laird was to survive, they would face not only the shadows of the curse but also the forces of men. "We will face them together," she said firmly. "I will not leave your side, no matter what comes." He regarded her silently, his eyes searching hers as if weighing her resolve. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he reached for her hand. She did not pull away. Hours later, the attackers arrived. Figures cloaked in black and armed with spears and swords moved up the cliffs, their horses snorting and stamping in the wet earth. The castle's gates, once a symbol of strength, now creaked under the weight of neglect and decay. The Laird and Ilara prepared themselves. She moved with quiet precision, helping him gather weapons and protective charms. "We cannot fight them all," he admitted, voice low, "and yet I will not run." "You will not be alone," Ilara said, "and I will stand with you even if the odds are against us." The first clash came at twilight, the sky a bruised purple as lightning split the clouds above. The attackers surged against the gates, their shouts and the pounding of hooves mingling with the wind and rain. The Laird took the lead, his presence commanding despite the weakness in his body. His sword was heavy in his hand, but he moved with a fluid strength that came from years of training and desperation. Ilara stayed close, her own movements precise and deliberate. She did not strike blindly. She protected, she guided, she stayed where the Laird needed her most. Together they formed a small but unbreakable shield against the tide of attackers. Amid the chaos, the Laird faltered. The curse surged through him, twisting his limbs and clouding his mind. He stumbled, almost falling, and a blade glanced past his shoulder. Ilara grabbed him, holding him steady. "I am here," she whispered. "Do not give in to the darkness." He met her gaze, panic and something softer, more fragile reflected in his eyes. I am not strong enough," he admitted, voice shaking. "I cannot do this alone." "You are not alone," she said firmly. "Look at me. You are not alone. And together, we are stronger than any shadow, stronger than any man. For the first time, he allowed himself to lean on someone. His hand covered hers, gripping it tightly as the battle roared around them. In that moment, the Laird realized the truth of the prophecy. The curse could not be broken by strength alone. It could be broken by loyalty, devotion, and the courage to face fear with another by your side. The attackers began to falter, their shouts growing uncertain as the Laird rallied, his presence commanding once more. Alara's steady words and unyielding courage gave him strength, anchoring him against the whispers and shadows that sought to claim him. When the last of the attackers fled into the fog, the castle lay battered but standing. The wind had calmed, the sea retreated slightly from the cliffs, and for the first time in months, the Laird allowed himself to breathe without immediate fear. He sank to the floor, exhausted, trembling from the fight and the curse alike. Alara knelt beside him, her hand still in his. "You are alive," she said softly, "and you will remain alive as long as you let me stay by your side." He looked at her then, his eyes dark and haunted, yet softened by something deeper. You stayed," he whispered. "Even when I could not promise safety, even when the world had turned its back, you stayed." "I stay because you are worth saving," she said simply. "Because you are more than the shadows that haunt you, and because I believe in you, even when you do not." A fragile silence followed, broken only by the crackling of the fire in the hearth. The Laird's chest rose and fell, his breathing slow and steady as he absorbed the weight of her words. And in that moment, he felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in years: trust. Days passed in quiet recovery. The castle bore the marks of battle, walls scarred and doors splintered, but the spirit inside seemed stronger than before. The Laird walked the halls with a steadier step, his eyes less haunted, though the whispers of the curse still lingered. At night he would sometimes sit by the fire, speaking quietly to Alara of memories long buried, of childhood games in the castle's gardens, of moments of pride and shame, of regrets he had carried like stones in his chest. She listened, offering no judgment, only understanding. And in her presence he allowed himself to be human, not Laird, not warrior, not shadow of a curse, but simply himself. One evening the fog thickened and the moon rose pale and full. Alara found the Laird standing on the balcony, gazing out over the cliffs. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed in silver light. She approached quietly, her footsteps soundless on the stone floor. "You are stronger than you know," she said softly, standing beside him. He did not turn to her, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "And yet I feel the curse still," he admitted. "It whispers of failure, of weakness, and of what I have lost." "You have not lost me," she said firmly. "I am here, and I will remain. That is not nothing." He finally turned to her, his eyes glistening with emotion he could not name. "I do not know if I am worthy of such loyalty," he said, voice barely audible. "I am a shadow of what I should be, haunted and broken." "You are enough," she replied, placing her hand over his heart. "Because you do not face the world alone anymore, and because even the darkest night cannot survive when someone chooses to stay with you." For a moment, the wind seemed to pause, the cliffs silent, the castle holding its breath. And then a distant horn echoed through the fog, a reminder that the world outside had not forgotten them. Danger would return, whispers would return, shadows would return, but so would they, together. The Laird took a deep breath, his hand covering hers. "Then let the world come," he said, voice stronger now. "Let it see that I am not alone and that I will not fall, not while you remain by my side." Alara's lips curved into a small, determined smile. "We face it together," she said. And in that promise, fragile but unyielding, a bond was forged that no shadow, no curse, and no army could break. But beyond the fog and cliffs, beyond the walls of the battered castle, unseen eyes watched and dark intentions stirred. The next trial was yet to come. The first light of dawn crept slowly over the cliffs, casting silver streaks across the sea and illuminating the battered castle. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving the air sharp and clean, with a quiet hush that seemed almost unnatural. Inside, the castle bore the scars of battle, splintered doors, walls blackened by fire, and stones littered with debris. But there was life and warmth that had not been there before. Laird Corvath sat on the edge of a shattered table, his cloak torn, his hands trembling from exhaustion. The whispers of the curse had grown nearly unbearable the night before, twisting his thoughts, pulling at his fears, reminding him of every failure, every betrayal. Yet through it all, Ilara had remained at his side, guiding him, supporting him, refusing to turn away. "You are alive," she said softly, kneeling beside him. Her hands were gentle on his, steadying him against the tremors of both body and mind. "And you will remain alive. I will not leave you." He met her gaze, and for a moment the storm within him mirrored the storm outside, wild, chaotic, unyielding. I cannot do this alone," he admitted, voice shaking. "The curse, the shadows, they are too strong." "You are not alone," Ilara replied firmly. "And together, we are stronger than any shadow, stronger than any fear." Outside, the fog lifted slowly, revealing the cliffs and the sea below. Birds began to stir, their cries piercing the morning air, a reminder that life moved on beyond the castle walls. The Laird took a deep breath, trying to anchor himself in the moment, to find strength in presence rather than isolation. The danger from the attackers had passed, but Ilara sensed that the true trial was yet to come. The curse itself, the darkness that had haunted him for months, would not be defeated by swords or walls. It demanded more than physical courage. It demanded trust, devotion, and the willingness to face one's own deepest fears. That afternoon, they made their way to the castle library. Among the piles of old tomes and scrolls, Ilara had discovered writings that hinted at the nature of the curse. It was not merely an illness of the body. It was a shadow born of doubt and pride, a darkness that clung to those who feared weakness and turned from love. "You must confront it," Ilara said, holding a small candle that flickered in the dim light. "Not with swords, not with strength alone, but with trust, with loyalty, with courage of the heart." The Laird shook his head, the weight of months pressing down on him. "I do not know if I am worthy," he said quietly. "I have failed so many, driven away those who loved me. How can I face this now?" "You are worthy," Ilara said softly, taking his hand in hers. "Because you are not alone, because you allow me to stand with you, that is what matters." He looked at her, his eyes dark, haunted, yet reflecting a flicker of something long buried, hope. "Then I will try," he whispered. That night the castle seemed alive with the shadows themselves. They twisted along the walls, whispered through the corridors, and pressed against the edges of perception. The Laird's mind quivered under their pressure, every doubt and fear amplified. Yet Ilara stayed by his side, her hand in his, her voice steady, her presence unwavering. "Focus on me," she said softly. "Not the shadows, not the whispers, look at me." He obeyed, forcing his gaze to hers, anchoring himself in her presence. Slowly, steadily, the tremors in his body began to ease. The shadows seemed to hesitate, their whispers faltering as if confused by the strength of the bond between them. "Do not fear yourself," Ilara continued. "Do not run from what you are. You are not the shadows, you are more. You are capable of light, of love, of courage." For hours they remained together, the storm of the curse raging around them, yet neither faltering. The Laird spoke little, but he listened, allowed himself to feel, to trust, to lean on the one who had never turned away. And slowly, imperceptibly, the curse began to weaken, its grip on him loosening as the bond of loyalty and courage grew stronger. At the first light of morning, the final test came. A darkness unlike anything they had faced surged through the castle, filling every corner with icy wind and whispering voices. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows stretching and twisting toward the Laird. He stumbled, fear gripping him as it had for months. "Alara," he gasped, "I cannot." "You can," she interrupted firmly. "I am here, and together we are stronger than this. Look at me." He did, and in that moment something within him shifted. He allowed himself to surrender to trust, to let another share his burden rather than facing it alone. The shadows recoiled, as though the curse had never expected such devotion, such courage, such unwavering loyalty. The storm subsided. The castle, battered but standing, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The whispers faded, and for the first time in months, the Laird felt clarity, warmth, and hope. He turned to Alara, his eyes reflecting both exhaustion and wonder. You have saved me," he whispered, voice trembling. Alara shook her head gently. "No, you saved yourself. I only stayed by your side. You chose to face the darkness, to trust, to believe. That is what broke the curse." A quiet smile touched his lips, fragile but genuine. "Then I owe you more than words can say." "You owe me nothing," she replied softly. "Only remember this, even in darkness someone will stay if you let them. That is all the world requires." Days passed, and the castle slowly returned to life. The gates were repaired, walls strengthened, and the storm-battered halls cleaned. The Laird walked with steadier steps, his mind clear, his heart lighter. He and Alara shared quiet moments in the garden, where the flowers were beginning to bloom despite the lingering chill of winter. One evening, as the sun set in hues of gold and pink over the cliffs, they stood together on the balcony, watching the sea stretch into the horizon. The Laird took her hand, the same hand that had never let go in months of fear and struggle. "All others turned away," he said softly, "but you stayed, and because of that I am still here." Alara looked at him, her eyes reflecting both relief and pride. "I stayed because I believed in you, and because even the darkest curse cannot withstand loyalty and courage." He drew her closer, not as Laird and servant, but as two souls bound by trials, shadows, and unwavering devotion. "Then walk with me," he whispered. "Through this dawn, through whatever comes next, only you can walk this dawn with me." She smiled, placing her hand over his heart. "Always," she said, and together they watched the sun rise fully over the cliffs, spilling light over the castle, over the sea, over the world. The shadows of the curse had been lifted, but the lessons remained. Trust, courage, and loyalty were the truest forms of power. The castle was no longer merely stone and mortar. It was a home, a sanctuary, a testament to endurance and devotion. And the Laird, once feared and alone, now stood strong, tempered by trials, tempered by love. The wind carried the scent of the sea and the warmth of the rising sun into the halls. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called, its song echoing across the cliffs, a reminder that life moved on, and that even after darkness, light would always return. Alara and the Laird walked side by side along the balcony, their hands intertwined. They did not speak much, for words were unnecessary. The bond they shared was unspoken but undeniable, a promise forged in shadows, tested by storms and strengthened by unwavering loyalty. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but not by magic alone. It had been fulfilled by courage, by devotion, and by the choice to stay, even when the world had turned away. And in the quiet moments of the dawn, the castle seemed to hum with life once more. The Laird and Alara looked out over the cliffs, the sea stretching endlessly, the sky painted with the promise of a new beginning. No shadows could reach them now, not while they had each other. And so the Laird, once feared, and the humble servant who had never turned away, began a new chapter together. One of hope, of trust, of courage, and of the quiet, enduring strength that comes when hearts choose to stay, even in the darkest of nights. The dawn was theirs.